The top of every mountain is the bottom of another. The top of every mountain is the bottom of another. Run for cover, you discover some will thrive and others suffer. Cause the top of every mountain is the bottom of another. Ooh, don't wait, don't hesitate. Better speak the truth, let it resonate and let it detonate and get blown away. Till you keep on rising to a higher place. Can't stop, won't stop, don't stop coming till we hit the top. Gotta keep pushing till the day I make it. Since they won't give it to me, then I got to take it. The pain today is power tomorrow. Keep on coming, but you'll never catch me running. Cause I won't bow down. No matter what they say, I wouldn't do it any other way. Keep on coming, but you'll never catch me running. Cause I won't bow down. The top of every mountain is the bottom of another. The top of every mountain is the bottom of another. Not enough to keep us smothered. Lower class, never the upper. Cause the top of every mountain is the bottom of.
Another good evening to you and Spacey Wolf Squadron. This is your Welcome to Wolf 10. Tonight we are talking about a topic that gets discussed on a few occasions. Other times gets scrutinized or slanderized, or even, shall we say, what's another word? Different a lot. It's been the basis of our society for many generations. It's been part of each and every one's culture. Talking about religion, of course, of all kinds, their effects on society, their impact on history. Also covering some of the things that are pseudo, excuse me, well. I'm here with the masterminds, both and with the house.
You're breaking out real bad, Wolf.
Yeah, you're roboting, dude. Significantly.
Well.
Can you hear me come clearly now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you're much better now.
Starting over with the house of Pow.
Oof. Second time happened, but other than that, good evening, morning, or afternoon, everyone. This is the Hound of the South, Don Call, and welcome to tonight's episode of the Real Millennials, where, as our fearless leader mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about religion as well as spirituality.
His partner in crime, the Authenticator.
Hello, everyone. They say you shouldn't. They say you shouldn't, in polite company, discuss religion or politics. But we like living dangerously around here, so right into the breach we go.
Definitely. Here with us is the ever so lovely Leia of our Leia Plus Size.
Good evening or happy late night to my friends here on the East Coast where it is midnight. Welcome to this is Leia Plus Size, your levelator Valor, and welcome to our discussion about religion, which is a very interesting topic. Hence, this is the Memorial Day weekend. But I am very sure with this crew that we have, you know how we do it. It is going to be a very interesting conversation. So glad you all of you that are here could take time to join us.
After this, we have our Sixth Ranger, Dark Stranger.
Good evening. Good morning.
Which ones do you want to talk about mostly, guys? Because I might have to sit this one out and let you guys wag your tongues at each other about it.
Oh? Is there some reason you shouldn't be involved in the discussion?
No, I just have nothing to contribute mostly.
I
can only talk about my experiences back being in a Baptist church.
Well, we can start with that. We could go over like our individual experiences like with the religions like we grew up with before going over like which ones the ones that have the most like impact, and also like maybe some obscure ones.
Also talk about run-ins with people with weird philosophies and religious, uh, spiritual practices as well.
and
This
and
should
from
be interesting.
and
And
from
you
there,
all,
Oh, not that. It's not that meaty let's just say it's. Let's just say I didn't really stick around them long enough to really see the crazy stuff. It's just red flags, walk away.
right, and by moving on from that is transitioning to like works of fiction that incorporated for like these religions like into their works of fiction.
Oh,
Which is,
I can
Yeah.
definitely contribute there. Like
But
and
Yevon.
does anybody have any religious background stories they would like to contribute? I feel like we're suddenly in a support group all of a sudden.
well, I guess I can start with like growing up. Grew up like with both sides of my family. I grew up on both Buddhism and Christianity. Yeah, to this day, like I still like I still practice them. Although I will say I don't go to church as much as I used to, but I do go to temple, which is Buddh the Buddhist equivalent like of church. And well, even like as a kid like I didn't want to choose like one religion over the others. So I practiced both of them, and as time went on, like I became like more of an agnostic theist. I still belong to the two religions that I grew up in as well as I've been taught. Because there are like comparisons. Are like comparisons, despite their differences, there's some similarities between like Christianity and Buddhism. Ah, and what? Well, welcome, Slim. Glad you could join us. Just also, you're Baptist and you practice Buddhism when you have a chance.
Hmm.
I guess like well, what I can't say before like one of us can join in. And is to dispel like one of the common misconceptions about Buddhism is the whole thing of like detachment. And when in that practice, it does not mean like detachment like from friends, loved ones, or whatever. It's like pretty much detachment from materialism to in order to achieve enlightenment.
There are more extreme Buddhists who do take it the whole way, though. To be fair,
Mm-hmm.
That is true, because even though like Buddhism in and of itself is not a not a like religion, well, not a religion per se, it does have like the carry-ons like of a religion.
every religion has a certain percentage of the crazies. Let's get that out of the way right now, because every religion has their certain percentage of wackos per capita.
In other words, it's not limited to just Christians and Catholics. Every religion and spiritual practice like have their extremists.
I'd go so far as to throw secular ideologies in there as well,
Oh yes, definitely.
and atheism and anti-theism also. Like people think that being an atheist makes you more rational,
Nope.
but it doesn't really do anything of the kind. Nor is there any one size fits all ideology that will instantly make you more rational than everybody else.
Which is
No,
Only
right.
weird.
only edgy teenagers who spend far too much time at Starbucks think that atheism is a one trick pony for rationality.
I mean, we will definitely touch on that as well as like agno like agnosticism like later on once we touch on secularism. But well, after since I finished with mine, who wants to go next?
I'm formerly Baptist. I won't say the name of the church home I used to be. Two of the church homes I was part of, but yeah, I was there. praying, praying every Sunday, going to Bible study, and you know, going to Wednesday service and afternoon service and morning service and even evening service. Those were fun times for sure.
Mm.
I'm sure.
I remember fondly. Do I regret leaving the church? Not so much. Do I? Do I have an Do I have an eternal issue as the reason? I can't recall anymore. It's been too long, and I've since changed my mindset over the years. You know, it was never
Out of curiosity, how much did the aforesaid wackos play a part in you leaving the church?
I believe the term you're looking for is zealots.
Well, again,
I don't
I
recall.
feel the need to just be honest about it. And nah, zealotry is one thing. Some people are just wackos.
Right. I wouldn't say I ever socialized with any zealots or experienced any zealotry being in a church. What were you asking, authenticator?
I was just asking if any particular bad experiences in the church led to you leaving it.
No, I don't think it was ever a bad experience in church. Is the reason why I left. It's more of a family thing. But like I said, I don't recall the reason why I left anymore. It's been so long.
Hmm.
Though I'm now probably virginal agnostic, probably on the pathway to return to the faith. Maybe we'll see.
All right.
I'm going on a sort of spiritual journey as we speak,
All right. So,
and
Dark.
maybe it'll turn me around back to atheism. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
undecided right
Yeah.
now what path I'm on.
You'll figure it out one way or the other.
Yeah. So, Dark, Leia, Authenticator.
I would prefer to go last because my
Oh, please don't go
my
last.
my various I have a very storied history with various religions, and it honestly in a movie it would be an origin story. So I will save my I will save my origin story for last, I suppose.
All right, man.
Let's put Leia on the chopping block then.
Well, my experience with religion is I grew up in a Christian family household, and the religion of choice was, yes, I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. It was the religion of my family and my grandma. It is very ingrained. It was very much part of my life, particularly from my mother, who was a very spiritual woman. And as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate her spirituality because that is really what guided her in raising me and my two sisters. And I do have to say that it really brought out some of the best qualities that my mother had. Now, there was a time and there was a phase, a very long time, when I did kind of, I had a love hate with it. And I was a time when I wasn't participating in it for a while because I wanted to find my own way. And it was time for me to make my own decisions and own choices since I was raised in it. But as I've gotten to be more mature, I appreciate the qualities that it did give my mother in raising me and for herself as a mother. But there were ups and downs in it. It did give me a sense, most people might not, but I can totally respect that, I do believe that there is a spiritual God, and I still haven't forgotten that. So, but most importantly, that's mostly how we were raised. But over the years, like I said before, to keep it short and brief, because I really didn't know how we were going to do this topic. I thought I was understanding of how religion plays in our storytelling, because lots of storytellers inculcate their religion into their stories. But most of all, I've come to appreciate how it helped my mother in raising us, and how it was for her, and how she carried herself as a mother. And there are parts of the religion that I feel that we kind of need. Well, I'll put it like this instead of pushing people. I think somewhere we need some sense of spirituality, no matter what spirituality you choose to have. Christianity may not be the thing for you, it may be something else. But I think in our society, I do see that we need some sense of it, because I do think that spirituality, some sense of it, because I think as a society, we are breaking down in some way, in one ways or another. And we need some sense of it to help us in how we treat one another and how we see and treat other people. And you see it in maybe perhaps, or I'll just speak for myself, the stories that I read, Lucas' sense of spirituality, maybe with the Jedi, or how some of my favorite characters carry themselves. For instance, the heroes that do not kill. All of that is inculcated in that. But I do feel we're missing something in our society. Something is definitely missing. So that is my story.
Well, we will definitely touch on that later on in the stream.
Yeah.
Dark?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Dark?
What have you two been doing, busy little bees?
Hmm.
Go on, Dark.
Dark, it's your turn. We've all confessed ours. You must confess yours.
And I'm saving mine for the end because it's a lot.
Oh, okay.
So go ahead,
if you
Dark.
if you have anything to contribute, Dark, we won't push you if you feel that if you want to wait till maybe religion and storytelling, whatever makes you best comfortable.
There's just not really anything to contribute. That's the thing. I got nothing there.
Okay. Would you like to wait until we get to how maybe authors use their spirituality in storytelling, no matter what it may be? It may be, it doesn't have to
I
be Christianity.
suppose that might be the only thing I could really contribute to. I mean, growing up, never really went to church.
Mhm.
The most I went to a church was when I was in the Scouts. That's about it. I don't.
So your upbringing didn't really have a religious component to begin with, is what you're saying.
Not really. I mean, a lot of my family is Lutheran, but we never really go to church or anything, and or really do any.
Kind of Lutheran in name only.
Uh, I cannot say. I don't ask about that, and I don't inquire about it. I just
Nor did he practice.
it's their business and not mine.
I see. Well, that being said, since Dark has done his, I guess it's my turn, and like I said, it is a bit, it's a lot, because I've walked a very long road with my particular spiritual life. I was raised Methodist. We were, although it must be said, even when we were going to church, we were kind of church on Sunday only people. Um, but the thing is, while I was raised and baptized Methodist when I was about 9 to 10, um, I was a weird kid, so I was always researching something or trying to figure something out. Um, it started honestly when I was 9, and my aunt's boyfriend lent me a copy of Stephen Hawking's Universe in a Nutshell, and that led to a 2-year tear where I was obsessed with theoretical physics. But eventually, when I got what I would consider to be a solid grasp on physics, I went looking for answers to questions that science didn't really have dominion over, and the answers provided by the church didn't really help me or didn't really resonate with me. And so I started researching philosophy more generally and occult and esoteric philosophy specifically. The problem was my best friend at the time was the pastor's son, and he was always kind of interested in the stuff that I became interested in because I was a weird kid who had weird hobbies, and I would frequently tell anyone who would listen entire like diatribes about them. And unfortunately, I was stupid enough to think, sure, I've only been studying magic and occultism for a year. It might be time to take an apprentice. I was about 13. This is why we all do very stupid things when we're young folks. But anyway, so I tried to show him the ropes of magic and occultism, and then his father, the pastor, found out, stormed into my home, locked me out of my own room, and read my parents the riot act about how I needed to repent and rejoin the church, and that it was all demonic, and yada, 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 yada. And he gave my parents an ultimatum. Either I should repent and rejoin the church, or carry on with my current path and seek destruction, I think is how he put it. Unfortunately for him, he gave me that choice, and that led to me basically leaving the church altogether, and my family leaving the church altogether, because when the pastor storms into your house at 10 o'clock at night and reads your parents the riot act, not only does that turn you off, but it frequently turns them off too, which I will give my parents credit for supporting me in that. But yeah, it was a whole thing, and it took me a very, very long time before I stopped having a chip on my shoulder about essentially being shunned from Christianity. I did eventually get there, specifically by learning about the esoteric aspects of Christianity, Gnosticism, the scholastic tradition of magic in theology, etc., and so on, especially during the Middle Ages and the Grimoire tradition, etc. And I did eventually get there, but in the interim, I became a polytheist, and I remain a polytheist. I have worked well when I was first getting into magic as it pertains to religion. The pantheon that drew my attention was the Egyptian pantheon. Over time, that has shifted somewhat. For a good solid 5 years, I didn't do anything with any deities at all. I just did magic from my own personal energy and didn't see much point in working with spirits or metaphysical entities. Then, after I ended up getting burnt out and flunked out of college, I went into an anxious depression spiral. And fortunately, that year for Christmas, my mother gave me the omnibuses for Neil Gaiman's Run of the Sandman, and that story pretty much restored my, at the time, very lagging faith in the world and storytelling generally. So I went in a deep dive to where I wanted to learn everything I could about Neil Gaiman's Run of the Sandman, which included watching interviews with the guy. And being, as I was a practicing occultist, I ended up looking into several of his interviews where he described his creative process and going, that sounds like it's been divinely inspired by the deity that the Sandman focuses on. And that's what started me sort of returning to the idea of working with spiritual entities, specifically through summoning and evocation is the term in the occult. And I'm still working my way through and trying to figure out how to summon the Greek Lord of Dreams, otherwise known as Oneros, to thank him for, however inadvertently, kind of saving my life. Also, in the interim, I became interested in the Celtic pantheon, and specifically the Fae. And I have since made a bargain with the Unseelie Queen, also known as Nick Nevin, also known as Queen Mab. And that is roughly about where my spiritual journey is circling at the moment. But I've worked or researched into just about every pantheon of spirituality, including the Abrahamic religions and the polytheistic precursors to the Abrahamic religions, which is an interesting topic for another day. But yeah, like I said, this is kind of my magical origin story, if you like, and it's a lot. And I knew it was going to be a lot. That's why I wanted to go last.
It may have been a lot, but it is pretty insightful.
That's still
And,
very interesting.
yeah, it actually reminded me like even like growing up like under Buddhism and Christianity, like even to this day, like, I still have. Well, I'm grateful and appreciative of being like taught under those two religions, like from not just my folks, but from both sides of the family. Well, like I've always been interested in like the gods and goddesses of the different religions, and like how they contributed like to their respective continents as the countries as well world at large like outside of their home region. Yeah, I mean, like when we really think about it, well, like each of the creator gods and goddesses, they help contributed to like how things became the way they are today. Like besides like the big guy himself.
Well, and then of course you run into the issue of if you actually look into the history of humanity, humans have been animistic or polytheistic a lot longer than they have been monotheistic. Monotheism is a fairly recent invent or a fairly recent paradigm on a like historic timescale. We're talking about mostly the last 4,000 years, but the uh, roughly 3 to 6,000 years prior to that, everyone was either an animist or a polytheist.
Yep.
Not that I'm necessarily saying it's better or anything. I'm just saying people, especially in today's day and age, act like it's a two-horse race between atheism and some version or other of the Abrahamic religions. And I frequently laugh when I hear fundamentalist Christians or fundamentalist Muslims and atheists arguing with each other, and I'm like, you guys do know there are other options, right? This is not just a two-horse race.
Right. It is. I mean, it was and it still is funny.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to those days.
Well,
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah. Well, I guess like with that being said, so we can now transition to how these different religions like made an impact, and not just like in society, be it in the west or outside of it, but also the long lasting impact they left behind in storytelling.
It really depends on how deep you want to dig, because there's plenty of gold in them there hills to be uncovered, depending on how deeply you want to dig.
Well, for me, in storytelling, and maybe it was conscious or unconsciously, I really don't know. A lot of the stories that I love to read in books when I was young, and the stories even now, have their basis or their inspiration comes from the author's faith, or their faith in mostly is Christian faith. Doesn't mean every now and then that I dibble dabble. As you all know, I'm a big fan of Anne Rice, but even in her novels, there's her dabbling a little bit into Christianity, into faith, particularly
Well,
with
yeah,
Lewis.
religious
Yeah,
paraphernalia and
yeah,
vampirism kind of have always kind of gone hand in hand.
yes, you're right, and I get that when I read her Vampire Chronicles, particularly with Lewis and what he was going through and the turmoil he was going through. I think she consciously put that into during her because she was raised strictly Catholic herself. So that's why you get all those religious iconography in her Vampire Chronicles. It's there. It's very much there, and it comes.
I mean,
her.
the twin flames of religious paraphernalia and vampirism or the supernatural
Mhm.
goes back probably straight to Bram Stoker if you want to get into it. And Bram Stoker, not many people kind of outside of the weirder side of things know this, but Bram Stoker was actually a member of the 19th century secret society known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And it's it was his fascination with mythology, with folklore, and with esotericism that led him to create his Dracula, which he explicitly did research on Eastern European folklore for, and that's why Dracula is Dracula, because, of course, everyone. It's become almost cliche at this point, but everyone knows at this point Dracula's sort of historical debt to the figure of Vlad Tepes Dracul, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler.
Yes, because we all know by now, for those of us that are big vampire fanatics, we know a part of the mythology of a vampire is that the cross is what repels them. And even in when he did his research, and when you go back to eastern parts of Europe, those that people literally really believed vampires existed. They really did, and they took it seriously. And the cross was one of the symbols that they used to say, well, to repel a vampire, because I can't find the words out the kid. Maybe you can say it better than I am, because of the fact that the vampire has no soul. And using the symbol of the cross to use it to repel him is what repels him. So they don't use it now, but that's probably one of the reasons why in some vampire movies, Van Helsing always had a cross, and the vampire would back away because of what it stood for.
And I like in modern day sort of vampire stories, it's specifically the faith in whatever iconography it happens to be, not just any one particular faith. That like for example, anyone who's ever read the Dresden Files knows that when he is fighting vampires, it's specifically the faith a person has in whichever religious iconography they believe in that repels them, not just Christian iconography. And to be fair, that also is bared out in at least a large portion of the lore, because of course things like garlic and salt and various other substances were considered in pre-Christian pagan cultures to have spiritual properties, and everyone at this point knows the vampire garlic thing. The reason garlic was thought to annoy vampires and other supernatural entities is specifically because garlic was thought to have purifying properties, if I can talk today. And it was the impurities of the vampire that were specifically sort of allergic to the purifying nature of both garlic, but also salt. Salt was also considered to have purifying properties back in the day. And it's the spiritual impurities of the vampire or the other supernatural entity that is the thing that makes vampires and other supernatural entities allergic to it. It gets even more interesting or even more complicated depending on how on the spectrum you are. When you consider that in the Middle Ages, vampirism and werewolfism were actually sort of subcategories of witchcraft. The thought was that in order to become a vampire or a werewolf, you had to make a bargain with a demon or other supernatural entity, and they would turn you into one as part of the contract. Most people, or I guess I should rephrase, most hack academics in today's day and age love to hyperfixate on the quote unquote feminism of witch trials and so on.
Oh,
And
jeez.
yeah, and frankly, that pisses me off as a magical practitioner for dozens of reasons. But in particular, it bugs me because if you know anything about the burning times, the period when witch trials were the most common, you know that even though witchcraft or maleficia, which would have been translated into English directly as malice, was considered kind of the feminine form of diabolical magic. Even then, the ratio of male victims to female victims of witch trials only stands to about 60-40. And then when you throw back in that there were other forms of diabolical sorcery that someone could be accused of by the Inquisition, and most of the other ones, especially werewolfism and vampirism respectively, were majority male. And so that's why whenever I hear somebody go, feminism and the era of the witch trials, I face palm to the point of wanting to put my hand through a wall because it floors me how something can affect everyone and somehow women most affected because reasons. And the
Yeah.
actual reasons why women were more commonly accused of witchcraft are also interesting, but I think that's an issue for another day.
Right. But I will say, like, adding on to this part of the conversation is, it's just as annoying where when anyone talks about like any of the witch trials, besides Salem, they don't really cover them like with honesty and objectivity, like they have an agenda.
Well, yeah, because people like, or I guess, again, I should rephrase, feminists, especially the social justice variety of feminists, like appropriating the victimhood of historical women.
There were
And
men during the Salem witchcraft trials who were charged for witchcraft as well.
yes,
Yeah,
and
Documented.
even like
Yeah.
even in the Connecticut witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
well, and again, if you actually go through the trial records, and I have, and you count up all of the accused, again, even in Maleficia or Malice, which was specifically supposed to be more common for women to be guilty of, even then the ratio only stands at about 60-40. 60% women to 40% men. And when you throw in all the other forms of sorcery someone could be accused of, the ratio inverts again, and men actually are the primary victims of heresy accusations more generally. But the feminists have a ideological obsession with claiming victimhood of women of the past, even if they don't understand any of the factors that led to those women of the past being victimized or in what context they were victimized. But, that's a whole nother conversation.
Speak on it being more for men. Would you also theorize that is it because that at that time it's due to the fact that women are thought to not be as dangerous as men as well?
Okay, here's well, you opened the door, and now I'm going to have to go into some detail on it. Here's the thing.
That's why I
Here
asked you.
here are some of the things that they don't take into account when they say which trials were based on misogyny or which trials were based on oppression of women, etc. The reason why women were more commonly accused of maleficia or malice, which is the term we translate to witchcraft now, the reason why they were more often accused is because of the theories of the people who were doing the prosecuting of the witch trials. Specifically, Jacob Springer and Heinrich Kramer, the authors of the now infamous Malleus Maleficarum, viewed witchcraft as an extension of the sin of lust, because the belief of the church at the time was that witchcraft was a misuse of the sexual generative impulse. The idea of the church was that you were supposed to use your God-given generative impulse to conceive children, and the thought was that because women were the ones who bore children, therefore they had a stronger generative impulse. Add to that the fact that women were considered more spiritually pure than men, and thus more innocent than men, and thus more liable to be tricked by the devil into signing her soul away without her knowledge. And that is why, or those factors are some of the factors as to why more women were accused of maleficia than men were. But here's the other little canard that they don't tell you, or that they don't draw attention to. Most people today, when they think of the idea of a male witch, the first term that comes into their minds is the term warlock. That is significant because the term warlock comes from an Anglo-Saxon word which meant traitor or oath breaker. What that means in context, and I'm going to fill in the gaps here. What that means in context is that when women were accused of witchcraft, the general thoughts of the persecutors of the witch trials was that they were tricked into it because women are too spiritually pure and too innocent to realize that they were signing their soul away. But when men were accused of witchcraft, and they were, again, 60-40, not only were they often held responsible for corrupting the purity of females who were accused of it, but specifically, men were thought to have consciously chosen to renounce their oath to God, hence why the term warlock was applied to them, because it was thought that they were oath-breaking by signing their souls away. In other words, when women are accused of signing their souls over to the devil, she obviously didn't realize what she was doing. We have to make her suffer in this life so as to save her soul in the next life. But when men were accused of witchcraft, he obviously did it on purpose, and therefore that makes him an oath breaker, and we should shun him and shame him and burn him, not to purify his soul, but to punish him. Obviously, in practice, that didn't make much of a difference in the sense that, whether you believed you were saving someone's soul and purifying it for heaven, or whether you were thinking that you were punishing them, they still wind up dead. But other thing that doesn't get brought up often, if a woman was with child when she was accused of witchcraft, she could get a stay of execution until that child was born, and very often she would get scot-free off of the execution because someone has to be alive to raise the child, don't they?
Oh yes, I've heard stories that that were pregnant. A famous female pirate, Annie, I forgot her last name, was supposed to hang. Yeah, but they spared her. Yeah, Anne Bonny was supposed to hang, but she was pregnant at the time, and they spared her, and she walked away scot-free because she was pregnant. But I did hear stories where if the woman was accused, but she was carrying a child, she was spared from an execution.
Yes. Um, Often until she was pregnant, or again, frequently they would just drop the charge altogether, or well, not drop the charge, but would spare you of execution entirely because someone has to raise the child. That's why there are so many modern day descendants of the women who were accused in Salem, for example. There are dozens of thousands of people living today who can tie their legacy back to the accused in Salem because quite a lot of them got off scot free because they got pregnant. Um, Meanwhile, of course, no male equivalent of this can be demonstrated. And it does show a even though it obviously doesn't make much difference practically in the sense that both wind up dead eventually, um, it does show a difference in sentiment between male people who were accused and female people who were accused. When a woman is accused, we have to punish her for her own good so we can purify her soul and so she gets to go to heaven after she's dead. But when men are accused, he obviously did it deliberately, so fuck him. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, it's very much like it is in today's day and age, where men will be men will be punished harsher for the same crimes as women, and women frequently avoid being punished at all, or will have their sentence committed or commuted rather. Uh, But you will never hear this from any feminists because they want to believe that the only reason that anyone ever persecuted people who were thought to have done witchcraft is because hereditary misogyny, and it's not,
Oh,
and it's never been the case.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yet they
Yeah,
want
that's the case.
they want to make it that way.
Yeah,
Dumb
time and time
broads.
again, like
Got
every
good,
time they.
and they keep fucking it up.
Yeah, they're twisting the truth, and that it would exactly as authenticated
It's like
just explained.
they want to be punished just the same way as men, but they think they can get around it, get away with it, or they they want some in some ways try to find a way to get punished like men, but hope that something of convenience could save them out of it. Like it's like they want to experience some sort of trauma or persecution, but that's a
Well,
whole different
it's the idea that to be a victim is virtuous by itself is one of the most pernicious ideas of modern day feminism.
yeah.
So
And
they will
that's a whole different
manufacture
conversation.
victimhood from thin air because that makes them in the moral right, don't you know?
Yeah. Lonely
And
broads.
what kills me is they will like psychoanalyze the people who did the witch trial persecutions to try to come up with like some secret hidden motive or secret hidden reason why they did what they did when we have their diaries. Like we have their private personal diaries where they have no incentive whatsoever to lie, and they explicitly said these are the reasons why we are doing this. This is the rationale we are operating on. Not to mention the actual court documents, which we also have because the witch trials occurred recently enough ago that it's one of the most well documented cases in human history. It's one of the most documented eras in human history. But instead of taking these people at their word and operating on the frameworks that they operated on, or at least taking what they thought and why they thought it into account, they go, no, he can't have actually been doing it for the reasons he says. He must have been secretly harboring misogyny.
that, that as well as we account also the women that were accused like of doing the whole thing. They should, if they actually did the research, see like not all of them were good people.
Also, yeah, a lot of the accusers of the people who were persecuted during the witch trials were also women or girls. Like Salem is a perfect example. Um, Samuel Adams and Betty Paris were the first two victims of the seizures the uh, that the doctors of the time attributed to witchcraft, and so Samuel Adam or yeah, uh, Abigail and Betty, uh, they and a bunch of their friends were often the people pointing the finger when a man or a woman wound up on the gallows. Also, interesting historical fact. Not related really to this, but it's an interesting historical fact that most people don't pay attention to when it comes to witch trials and so on. The reason why the Salem alleged witches were hung rather than burned is because in most of continental Europe, witchcraft was considered to be a religious crime, was considered a heresy. In England and England's colonies, it was considered a civil offense because King James was a paranoid bastard who would have given Nixon a run for his money, and he essentially thought that the reason why people didn't like his I'm trying to think of not administration. What is the king equivalent of administration? His reign.
Royal decree.
I don't know why. I don't know why that took me so long. He thought that the reason why people didn't like his reign was because witches were cursing him to convince people not to like his reign. It couldn't have possibly been anything to do with the fact that he was a tyrant. And he was such a tyrant, actually, that if you look in the King James Bible, there are verses where the word used would have translated to the English word tyrant. And he specifically told his translators to translate them as something else because he didn't want the people to be aware of the idea of a tyrant if he could feasibly avoid it.
Well,
the more
there.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That sort of makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, but back to what I was saying. Sorry, I didn't finish. Hence why King James ruled that anyone tried for witchcraft or other variety of diabolical sorcery was to be executed by hanging, which was the civil, the secular method of execution, as opposed to burning or torture, which was the religious method of execution.
So we got a little history lesson there. It's very true. It's very true there. Um, Before we go, if I have anything to add to that, which I don't know at much, if I could turn it back, as Dom said, back to literature, because I know it's amazing how we got there, but I'm glad we went into the Salem witchcraft trials because it's also an example of, because I did the play The Crucible in college, and that was sort of based on those witch trials, which was, you want to talk about religious fanaticism, that was just so many innocent people were hung unnecessarily because of fanaticism of the certain things they do. If you're born different, if you had one eye color different than another, or you said something different, or whatever it may be, people accuse you of witchcraft, and you really didn't have much say, and you had a fake trial, and then you were off to be hung.
To be fair, that didn't really start to happen until the latter years of the witchcraft trials, because this is another thing that we get taught in elementary school and it never gets corrected unless you actually take your time and go into the history yourself. People assume, largely because they've been miseducated, that there was never anyone who ever actually referred to themselves as a witch or as a sorcerer or as the term for most of history was wise woman or cunning man. But that's not true. There were several there were several cases where people would actually out themselves willingly of being practitioners of witchcraft. Now, the trick that the church and then later the English government pulled is the peasant's definition of a witch or a wise woman or a cunning man was different than the church's definition. To be a witch in the church's sense, you needed three things. You needed a pact with the devil or other such supernatural entity. You needed, again, calling back to the Malleus Maleficarum, you needed essentially what would later become known as sex magic, and you needed the actual malefic aspect to the magic. Another thing that people don't know or don't know unless they look into it is we think, again, because of alarmingly miseducated elementary school levels of education, that anyone who was accused of using any magic at all was immediately tried for witchcraft. But that's not true. There was, in fact, a distinction among not only scholars but peasantry between white magic or magic that was intended to heal or to have some beneficial aspect, and maleficia, which was malefic in nature. So only after all of the, for lack of a better phrase, actual witches were tried and convicted, did the paranoia start, where they started referring to things that previously hadn't been considered witchcraft as witchcraft because, frankly, some people just liked burning or hanging their neighbors on relatively spurious grounds, to the point that several people who were known to be village wise women or cunning men, but never did any harm with their alleged knowledge, would later be accused, not because there was no distinction between light and black magic, but because once we started executing people, we realized that maybe some of those people who claimed to be doing it positively are in fact doing it negatively and could be lying. And that turned into anyone and everyone could be one, because if some of the light workers were lying, then what's to stop people who don't have any outward knowledge or appearance of it at all from lying? And then comes the paranoia that most people associate with witchcraft. That actually didn't happen until the latter 20 to 40 years of the Burning Times. The Burning Times themselves lasted nearly 200 years. Most people don't know that either. It started in the 16th century and then went well into the early modern period, or the 17th and 18th century, to be more precise.
I'm gonna shoot something towards you guys that's been on my mind of late too. This whole going trend within the church community, where some people are altering the Bible or come up with their own Bibles to bring into the church, or the fact that they're rephrasing certain words within the church, like a woman, or even shifting gears to worshiping women now instead of the Lord. What's your take on that one?
Unfortunately, that's a practice as old as the hills. For as long as there's been a quote-unquote canonical Bible, people have been altering phrasings or editing it, or hell, just taking it out of context altogether. Like I just mentioned when I was talking about good King Jimmy and his paranoia. explicitly removing any verse that contains the word tyrant, because we don't want the poor to be understanding what a tyrant is, because otherwise they might accuse the current monarch of being one. Uh, and as
Well, like,
far as the worship of women instead of God, um, that's also unfortunately very old, because frankly humans as a species seem to have a pro female bias. They've actually done studies on this. um, they've done studies where they've asked men and women whether they would prefer to associate with a man or a woman. And they found something rather counterintuitive and interesting, because you would think the intuitive answer to that question would be either both genders have a sense of like gendered camaraderie, women preferring women and men preferring men, or you'd think it would be the opposite, where because of sexual selection, men would prefer to be around women and women would prefer to be around men. What they actually found was that women have a um, have an in-group preference, meaning that women would rather hang out with other women, but men actually have an out-group preference. There is no male equivalent to the female quote-unquote sisterhood, apparently. Um, Men would rather hang out with women, and so would other women, which, speaking as someone who considers himself a men's rights advocate, I must point out that of course leaves that of course by necessity means that no one likes men, but you know, baby steps, I suppose. There are other issues to be considered, but uh, when you consider that kind of intuitive, the like evolutionary psychology term for it is gynocentrism. Um, when you consider that sort of evolutionary psychological aspect of gynocentrism, it's not surprising that that everyone seems to think that women are the morally perfect, or at least morally better sex, and that's not new. Um, it's kind of funny if you look back into the history of law. There are cases every generation or so where someone proposes a new law on the grounds that it would be better for women, when it turns out that a law that was previously proposed was thought to be better for women. Like for example, under a law system known as coverture, men were expected to retain custody of children upon a divorce because men were financially obligated to pay for them. But the earliest suffragettes and feminists um, decided to change that on the grounds that women were better caregivers. Cut to a generation or so later, and second wave feminists are swearing up and down that the idea that women retain custody of their children after divorce is a patriarchal way of enslaving women to taking care of children. Meanwhile, it was feminists themselves who insisted that it be that way. And by the way, when coverture was adjusted and overturned in that way, the woman retained custody of the children, but not the financial burden or obligation to pay for them. Such that when women had jobs of their own, they could keep their money in a status that was known as femme sole, i.e., the woman alone. But her husband was still financially obligated to support not only her, but their entire family. And there are historical cases where a woman was actually making more money than her husband, but her husband was the one who was legally obligated to take care of the family. And so if he could not if he could not pay for all of the things that the woman had ordered or wanted, he was carted off to debtor's prison. And on the topic of debtor's prison, this is getting way off into the weeds here, but something interesting about the quote unquote women couldn't own property canard. They couldn't own property on paper because in an era where there were debtor's prisons, it was the husband or the man that was obligated to serve in debtor's prison if his wife racked up a bill that was too vast to pay, and that's why women weren't quote unquote allowed to own things on paper, because if she defaulted on her property, it was her husband, not her, who was thereby obligated to get carted off to debtor's prison and frequently die there.
Jesus.
Oh dang.
Yeah, awful. If I may add with authenticator, and I won't stay on that long, Wolf, to go to your question. And again, I have to refer back, and I have to go upon my experiences in my being raised by my mother, and it was strictly read that the Bible is God's word, and that anyone trying to edit or change the word in their favor of what they like, then they're not taking God's word seriously. Now, as far as in the Bible and Christianity, again, I'm speaking by what I was raised in my household by my mother. God had roles for each person. There's a role for a man, there's a role for a woman, and there's roles for the children. And for the man, pure and simple, he was the head of the household. He was physically stronger, and he had an obligation to take care of his family and his wife and any of the children. The wife, if married, was in subjection to her husband, and she was also the nurturer. If you can go back even to all the way to Adam and Eve, but even the way women were created and our physical makeup, we are made up to be nurturers and caregivers, and it's ingrained in us. The term motherly instinct is ingrained in us. I've had motherly instincts at time, and I personally don't have children of my own, but I definitely felt it when I was having my sister take care of my two nephews. But I think for most, Wolf, why that's being altered is that if a woman is a feminist or women of today, that's hard for them to accept. They don't want to accept the fact that their role is secondary to a husband or to a man. Now, God did lay down rules that men, your wife is not your slave. She's not your servant.
Mm-hmm.
But she should not be treated as your servant. She is not your slave. She's not your slave. So there's nowhere in the Bible. Yes.
Well, here's an interesting thing about that. Feminists will lose their goddamn minds over 1 Corinthians 7 verse 4, which is the verse that says something to the effect of a woman should subordinate herself to her husband, etc. But just after 1 Corinthians 7 verse 4, there is verse 5 where it says that a man's obligations are not to himself but to his wife.
Mm-hmm.
What's being described there is a system in which each party subordinates their own desires for the sake of the other one. The man subordinates his desires for the woman's desires, and the woman in turn subordinates her desires for his desires. That is a mutualistic contract. But because feminists are pathologically incapable of realizing anything at all could ever negatively affect men, they will hyperfixate on 1 Corinthians 7 verse 4 and not even notice verse 5.
Yes. Absolutely. That is very true. That's very true. On that, it's exactly as you said. And men are obligated. It is their duty to take care, if they have a family, to take care of the wife and to care for the child and it's part of masculinity. It is not toxic because there's nowhere in there that says of that. It is instinct for them to do so. That is why they are physically stronger. Physically, whether you want to admit it or not, that is why they are physically stronger because
Not
they are
not
just
to
because
not to mention it. Not to mention it's women who pick the men they marry, and so if women generally like men who are physically stronger than them and like men who are willing to put down the necessary sacrifices to be a provider, and there are sacrifices involved in that,
yes.
um, it is because that is the kind of men that women generally respond to. Even feminist women or like hyper gynocentric women, despite their conscious statement that they want a submissive, effeminate, a man who's open with his emotions, etc., they usually wind up with the physically dominant thug type if they don't have a more like traditional the achievement oriented male, because the reason why men are physically stronger than women, by and large, is because in the past, as now, those were the kind of women, or those were the kind of men that women gravitated to, and thus those were the men who passed on their genes, and thus the uh, sexual dimorphism was continued.
Mhm.
I mean, the only thing the only thing you really need to look at is how turned off is a feminist woman at the very thought of ever being in a relationship with a feminist man. That there's your QED right there if you need one.
True. Yeah, true. You guys know me, so you know. No, you don't want a weak man. When women back in those ancient times, whatever times or medieval times, whatever time period when you go, women mostly
Any
eyed
period.
any period. Women when they were searching for their mate, they usually put their eye on a strong man. They didn't want any weak. They wanted a man who was capable of
Ooh, and
taking care.
God forbid they were with a weak man and they're eyeing a stronger man who's
Yeah.
also in a relationship with a stronger woman. I mean, that was that's a recipe for disaster, especially for both parties. I mean, they put you know the constant put downs towards a spouse, the elevation of a man that ain't even hers. It's 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 crazy. Just human behavior is fascinating to study and observe at times.
I agree. Yeah.
Plus, it's mm, the only reason why I bring this up is you know there's a lot of factions that are trying to get to the top of the anthill.
Yes.
But I'm hyper fixated on the feminist aspect to this. That's the reason why I'm bringing it up now, authenticator. It's mostly because I'm seeing the as you call it gynification of Christianity as we speak. That especially
And
within the black community, the black churches, there's a sort of gynification going on within the black church, and I'm not trying to make this a whole race thing. I'm mostly
no,
noticing.
I mean, you would know to speak to that particular demographic. Although I must tell you, you're not the first black man who's ever mentioned this to me.
No,
I have several friends who are black, and pretty much all of them have confirmed precisely what you're describing.
yeah, it's been a very growing trend, as we would say, of the guyification of the black church, and it's
To
still
be
one of
fair, this is
the,
also true of white men, although I think just to a less overt degree.
exactly. You know how y'all
Hmm.
operate. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I mean, I'm gay. I am immune to the woman jutsu, thankfully. So that's
I'm
a good
seeing
thing. But
white people being sneaky. Y'all have a history of that. No, I'm kidding. Okay. It's
point being,
true. I'm
I
kidding.
mercifully was created gay, and thus I am immune to the woman jutsu, except for perhaps my mother, because no matter what gender you happen to prefer, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, as the old saying goes.
And sometimes she ain't never happy.
Well, and the modern day dating scene is a perfect example.
Well, there's another thing that
But
I want to bring up
that's
too.
a topic for
So,
a topic for a different stream. We should probably
yeah.
get on to the pop culture aspect of religion now, since Tom has been wanting to talk about it for
Now,
like the last 20
now that you
minutes.
bring that up, this whole be, before we get into that, let me close off on this too. On another thing that we can kind of talk like a cool minute of the gods worshiping. There's a whole lot of subsect of women. I know it's focused on women, but they're the by far the loudest speaking at this point, right?
Oh yeah.
So if they didn't want to be talked about in such a manner, you would think they would do exactly what people have been asking them to do, which is shut the hell up.
I heard a really interesting quote on this topic that comes to my mind in cases like this. There's a YouTuber by the name of Dr. Random McCam, and in a video he once made the observation: a woman who believes in Athena knows she will never be Athena, but a woman who believes in the Virgin Mary worships mortal woman as her goddess.
Hmm.
Now, I mean, there's an argument as to how applicable that is and whatnot, but I do definitely see there being at least some truth in that, in the gyneolatry that's overcoming large sections of every church now. I definitely think there might at least be some arguable truth in that, as cheeky as it is phrased.
There's also noticing that a lot of women try to fancy themselves as the Greek goddesses, specifically Artemis, or at least they in the case of the ladies that got stuck in space for a few months ago, happened to name their space shuttle Artemis, or name their space project the Artemis project. And I was like, okay, look,
And then
I know
there's
why y'all picked Artemis.
and then there's the feminists who try to appropriate occult spirituality and witchcraft for feminist ideological reasons. I actually recently did a video on my channel entitled "The Feminist Cosmology Rejects the Mother Maiden Crone and It Makes Them Shit as Witches," or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly what I titled it. And I titled it that specifically because there are qualities, there are virtues associated with each phase in a woman's life. And feminism kind of uniquely rejects them all. The maiden is known to be pure, is known to be virginal, is known to be chaste, is known to be innocent and therefore subject to wonder. But to feminists, the ideal female character is somebody like Daria Morgendorffer from Daria, or Raven from Teen Titans, or Mandy from Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. A young girl who is world weary and cynical beyond her years, and frequently also quote unquote sexually liberated and therefore not virginal. Mothers, same thing. Mothers are supposed to be nurturing, supposed to be caregiving, supposed to be the healers, etc., and so on. But feminism demonizes motherhood and instead substitutes in the career woman archetype, the Miranda Priestleys, the Hillary Clintons, etc., and so on. And for all of their dislike of the other two, they also dislike the crone because feminist women are frequently the ones most inclined to do plastic surgery or anti-aging treatments and so forth to prevent themselves from growing old gracefully. And because they reject the maiden and the mother, they don't have any wisdom when they get to their crone phase. They only have a hole in their heart that usually you see in feminist fiction in stories like How Stella Got Her Groove Back or Eat, Pray, Love, where a woman in her middle age or her postmenopausal period has to go out and find herself because she wasn't able to find any of the benefits that she would have gotten had she gone through the trials of the maiden and the trials of the mother. So they don't like the innocence or purity of the maiden. They don't like the nurturing caregiving of the mother, and they don't like the idea of growing old gracefully, nor do they have any particular wisdom of the crone, and that's why basically a lot of older feminists have to basically start over, start back on maiden to rediscover themselves because they didn't actually learn anything in their lifetime prior to that point, and they have to
Shotgun.
relearn everything that they should have known since they were young.
Well, I guess I could tell you all for women like Tulsi Gabbard, and like Joan Jett of Joan Jett and the Black Hearts and countless others. Like they may be crones, but they've aged gracefully and did not do plastic surgery and any other anti-aging treatment.
I mean Helen Mirren and woman who played Galadriel, Kate Blanchett. I couldn't think of her
Yes.
name for a second. They are probably the quintessential example of someone growing old gracefully, and for as much as
And Linda
for as
Carter.
much as Miranda Priestley was a terrible, terrible character for God damn it, her name also escapes me. Woman who played Julia Child in Julie and Julia, Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep.
Um, yeah, for as much as Miranda Priestley was a terrible character, for the most part, it seems like Meryl Streep is also growing old gracefully and not resenting or feeling lonely or hard done by because of her aging. Unlike quite a lot of older feminists who suddenly realize, oh, wait, now in my old age, I don't have anyone to look after me because I slept around and had abortions when I was younger, so no children, and I wouldn't have wanted to be a mother even if I was, because motherhood is oppressive, TM, don't you know?
I mean, heck, take a look at the creator of Sex and the City. Like she learned that lesson the hard way, and she regrets not like not being a wife and not having a family of her own.
And
And
now
and
some of
again,
them
back
turn to
back to
cannibalization or
yeah back
cannibalism rather. They
yeah
turn to
back to what I was getting at with the feminists love to appropriate witch imagery and witch spirituality, but how much of a quote unquote witch can you be when you straight out reject the triple goddess archetype of the mother maiden crone? Um,
Well, that's what we're seeing now, and I don't like this trend of motherhood or being a wife is evil. You should avoid that. Stay away from that. Stay away from love. Stay away from love for a man. Stay away from motherhood. Go out, get the job, be the CEO, be the boss of your business.
yeah,
It's okay.
men
Yeah,
are
they
men are
do
your
that.
oppressors, and
yeah.
choosing to marry them is an act of
It's funny.
slavery, and
It's
motherhood is
funny to
also
see that they're
slavery,
putting
don't you
that
know,
on
Dirk?
little girls who probably never had that thought into their head until now, and they're put in situations where you obviously they're it's obvious that their minds are not set for that. Even if
Hmm.
they grow to like it in the end, their mind most of their minds are not set to that. There's a lot of women out there that do work and do raise a family and do marry and still work, right?
And good for them if they manage to balance it all. But
Yeah. What I'm saying is these are women that also appreciate the things that they have as well. It's like they have a working husband too. They have
Mm-hmm.
kids to come home to. They have, you know, they can still do the things that a wife's duty, uh, what's the word, dictates or demands at
Duties.
times. I'm saying, yeah, the wife's duties, demands, and dictates in the household. They still respect the household that was set and built by their husbands, right? But there are some girls that are still lost and unguided due to them, most of them being in a single mother household, of course, for one. For two, there's the ones that outright reject both parents and think that they can go their own way and just, you know,
Well, I mean,
view their um view their parents as master and slave in that context.
at the core of most feminism and even some strains of traditionalism, because unfortunately there are quote unquote traditionalists who straight up embrace the feminist straw man and actually do consider it some kind of slavery cult. But point being, at the core of most feminism and even quite a few strains of traditionalism now, there is a straight up hatred and disregard of men entirely. Whether it's the feminists saying, um, whether it's the feminists saying, um, men are the oppressors, or it's the hyper traditionalist quote unquote woman saying, he's not a real man unless he gives me all the gives. Um, it's still this innate sort of hatred for men as people. You just about occasionally see them like men for what they can get from men or what those men do, but there's almost no regard whatsoever for men as thinking, feeling, independent human beings with their own
Which
problems.
I have to ask, the hell did I ever do to you? I don't even know you. You
Oh,
know,
oh, oh.
because they
Another
always speak with
question,
a broad brush. You know,
right?
they always speak and paint with a broad brush. And when every time I hear their
Well,
stance, I'm
because
like,
if they didn't, their entire ideology would crumble in the space of like two
that's true.
seconds because they would realize that not all women are a hive mind, and most men don't even consider themselves eligible for a male hive mind because, as I covered earlier when I was talking about the in group out group preference thing, men don't actually have an in group preference. Women apparently do, and that kind of baffles me because it leaves a situation where
And I'll end off on
everyone
this.
loves women and everyone either doesn't care about or actively detests men.
And I'll end off on this and move on to the pop culture section of this talking point. You know, you know, should we even have a preference? You know, damned if we do, damned if we don't. Like we'll still be condemned for it.
Yeah, it's again, they don't they view men at best as means to an end. Like at best, they're expensive appliances that will give me all the gives, and at worst, they try to avoid having anything to do with men to begin with.
So pop culture reference or pop culture
Yeah, pop culture
religion.
as relates to religion, and religion as it relates to pop culture.
Well, well, since Leia actually brought up George Lucas and the Star Wars series, and leading into the original expanded universe, the true continuation of Star Wars, you can
Mm.
tell, like in the making of the Star Wars series, that Lucas was heavily inspired by Eastern religion and philosophy, especially Taoism.
Yeah, the Force is very similar to certain concepts of like chi or prana or essentially a kind of universal life force. There is also, though, to be fair, a Western equivalent of the Force in in uh, Neoplatonism, particularly thanks to Henry Cornelius Agrippa. he believed in a concept he referred to as the anima mundi, which translates to English as the world soul, kind of like the underlying intelligence that underpins all of nature. And of course that branches into like pantheism if you follow it far enough. And there are people like Pelagius, not Plagueis, but Pelagius, different different guy entirely. There was
Mhm.
a theologian known as Pelagius who viewed nature as essentially God's diary. And so by growing to understand and appreciate nature, you could also grow and understand God in turn. And how even supposedly secular thinkers like Einstein would eventually echo the same concept of to research science is to understand the mind of God, essentially.
Mhm. Yeah. No, well, speaking of Einstein, I mean, like the greatest minds, like within the field of science, that like they were not all of them were atheists or even agnostics. Like they were religious themselves.
How would you classify Dune's religion?
No,
Dune.
that is honestly a good question.
Does Dune have a reference to religion or
It,
want
Yeah.
it,
Oh
to?
yeah. Yeah.
I
No.
mean,
No. No. There is.
actually quite a few because Frank Herbert essentially used Dune as a way to comment on various different strains of or facets of religion, particularly Islam, was a huge influence on the
Mhm.
spirituality of on the spirituality of Dune. And hell, even the spice melange, the MacGuffin around which the entire um, world of Dune revolves, is a reference to the Silk Road, which was a Middle Eastern trading route that was overseen by the Ottoman Empire.
I
Oh
can't.
yeah.
Oh
No. No. Because I mean, he's not entirely wrong.
no, he
Because
isn't. Mm-mm.
I mean, with Dune, like continuing on in the later books before like Frank's death. And, like yeah, they the the implementation of the the history and religious practice of Islam is very much incorporated within the narrative, but it's not beating you over the head, like of Islam.
I think Frank Herbert did a good job of pulling different things from a lot of different places, um, and
Others before
incorporating
and
them
after him
into
did
a
as well.
world that could stand on its own 2 feet. And frankly, I'm always in favor of when authors are smart enough to do that because overbearing themes and overbearing um, sort of one note subject matter is very insufferable. It's one of the reasons why I usually prefer Tolkien to C.S. Lewis, because Tolkien was very heavily influenced by Christianity, but also by um, pre-Christian European spirituality like Beowulf and the Norse sagas and so on, and incorporated them together in a way that created a new world entirely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas C.S. Lewis literally made the Bible a huge facet of his work to the point that the Pevensies are referred to as the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, and
Mhm.
it's heavily implied that Aslan is literally the Jesus,
Mhm.
and and
Yes.
Hmm.
that
Mhm.
always that personally for me, even when I was more Christian, bugged me about the Narnia books as compared to Tolkien because there's plenty of Christianity in Tolkien's mythos. He was just smart enough to weave it with other stuff because he actually liked other stuff. Where it seemed like C.S. Lewis had a Bible shoved up his ass most of the time.
Mhm.
The Bible Belt.
Yeah, because I was going to say I can't really talk too much
I'm gonna
about
talk to you
Jude.
about Lion Jesus.
Oh god.
I can't say that more
Lion
about
Jesus is the way.
Lion
Praise
Jesus.
and worship Lion Jesus.
So the epitome of Christianity is pussy.
Okay.
He was waiting on that moment.
Hey, always
Wah,
leave a
wah, wah,
time.
wah.
Time was not wasted.
Mhm.
Go on, authenticator.
I was good. Oh, before you, I'll just get one thing in, and then authenticating continuing to talk. I was just
No,
going to say,
no, I didn't really have anything else. Go ahead.
Mm.
I
Or
wasn't going to say,
I mean I do, but it'll come up later probably.
I didn't want to say too much on Dune because, as everybody knows, I'm not a big Dune fan, so I don't follow the mythology. I'm much more into Tolkien, and I was just going to say how Tolkien's Christianity or Christian faith is reflected in his Lord of the Rings trilogy, in his work, or in the appendices, as you mentioned very briefly. The Christian theme is very much there in that, and with the elves and what the elves represent, and many other characters in the story that I won't really break into, but a lot of that is in his writings. And also you mentioned C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, another series of books I enjoy very greatly. That too, as you explained. But for Tolkien, very much part of his faith was inculcated in the mythology of the world of Middle Earth.
And like I was saying, I think Tolkien aged better because it was less
Yes,
hitting the nail on the head.
yes,
Because Tolkien, while he was a very devout Christian, he also was a lover of ancient mythology and ancient folklore, and essentially
It's
um
festival.
wanted um his legendarium to be kind of a missing mythology of the English. Because of course anyone who's read the Silmarillion knows the parallels to Christianity, with Eru Ilúvatar being the creator deity and then Melkor being his offspring who betrays him, and etc.
right.
But there's also plenty of polytheistic lore in there to be had, because of course the Valar are sort of halfway stuck between archangels um, and polytheistic deities in the way they operate.
Oh, very much so.
And I mean, the most transparent Christ figure in Tolkien, or at least in Lord of the Rings, is probably Gandalf. What with the whole
Mhm.
coming back in a flowing white garment thing. But of course, um, another large influence on Gandalf was Odin, who
Yep.
frequently, according to the Norse sagas, would disguise himself in a flowing gray or sometimes blue cloak and pretend to be a wandering beggar. So you can see where that influenced Gandalf. How even the name Gandalf, if you look up um, Anglo-Saxon languages, the name Gandalf means something like wand elf or wand bearer, which anyone who's read the Norse sagas knows. Wand bearer was one of the epithets attributed to Odin. Granted, Odin has all the epithets because he collected them like freaking Pokemon, but one of them is wand bearer.
Yeah, you got that right. Oh, I guess another example of a work that's been influenced by multiple like mythologies and religions. I look at gargoyles.
Yeah, Gargoyles continues to be peak television, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but now when I think about it, yeah, you're right. That's another good example. I'm sorry, I
Well,
was thinking about the
in the sense that Gargoyles was heavily influenced by Shakespeare and also by Conan the Barbarian, and both of those were heavily influenced by various elements of spirituality. People now probably don't think of fairies very much as having a place in the Christian cosmology, but when the church was first converting the Celts to Christianity, they sort of wound up um, scratching their heads and trying to find a place for fairies to fit, because the problem the church had was we can't exactly tell people that the fairies don't exist because people have daily interactions with them and stuff. So we have to find a theological framework in which fairies can exist. And what they came up with was the church excuse for fairies were alleged to be angels who were not good enough to stay in heaven, but also weren't bad enough to be condemned to hell. And so they wound up in the middle on Earth.
Yeah, you're not wrong on that front.
Granted, that didn't last very long because um, pretty much everyone and their dog knew that fairies were, based on the or were spawned from the Celtic gods. So that wasn't a very successful piece of propaganda, but it was another case of the church going, we have to find some way of working this in, otherwise we won't be able to convert people effectively. So we'll make up an excuse.
That actually is a nice little segue to pretty much like how not just like those religions were handled and practiced back in the past, but also how how most of today's works of fiction tend to portray the churches of yesteryear. Yeah, 'cause instead of like
I mean, Netflix's Castlevania is simultaneously a really, really good excuse of that or example of this, and also very overt in its theming because um, Netflix's Castlevania adapts Castlevania 3 more than it does anything else, and in that Dracula's wife, Lisa, was accused of witchcraft and then burnt at the stake. And so, despite the fact that Castlevania takes place in Wallachia and therefore probably should be Eastern Orthodox rather than Catholic, in Castlevania, there's a lot of talk of the church's more authoritarian excesses during that period. Although to be fair, Castlevania is really interesting and really well rounded because it incorporates a lot of um, medieval and Renaissance Hermeticism into its world building, such
hmm
that the natural sciences, religion, and the occult sciences or magic um, were kind of seen as three separate forms of knowledge, I guess is the best way of putting it,
Mhm.
in the cosmology of Netflix's Castlevania. Netflix's Castlevania is really good. Nocturne was bad
yeah,
for various reasons, but the original 4 seasons of Castlevania were pretty freaking awesome.
even though like they either change the lore from the games or
They fall
they
short
should
some places.
portray them like really wrong. Like for example with the speakers, because in the games, in the source material, with speakers they were actually allies like to the churches, and they were actually go to the villages that they assigned them to investigate and take down various supernatural threats. But in the Netflix Castlevania,
They're
they
basically a stand-in for Romani. Um,
yeah, yeah, and not pretty much
that being said, we should cut Warren Ellis
churches.
or is it Warren Ellis or Garth Ennis
War
who
Ellis.
Warren
thank you.
Ellis.
I always get them confused. I think because their names are similar, and so are their ways of doing different IPs are also very similar because they're both born from the British invasion to some degree. But to cut Warren Ellis some slack, some of the things that were glossed over in the first 4 seasons of Castlevania probably would have gotten more depth and more detail had he been allowed to actually do the story that he wanted to do instead of having to shove 500 different storylines into the last season because he got Me Too'd and Netflix gave him the boot.
Yeah, but like at the
You
same
see how
at the
that
same time,
happens? You see the effects of that?
yeah,
Mhm.
and also adding on to that, that in a way it was something that was built up over the years because besides Garth Ennis being known for his huge huge like contempt for capes, Warren Ellis is known like among circles even outside of comics to be pretty much against organized religion.
Which, I mean, it is worth noting that at least in Castlevania, you don't really get much of that. Like, the bishop who burns Lisa at the stake is blamed as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really,
Mhm.
there's not much blame laid at the feet of the church proper, with the exception of the fact that Dracula gave them 1 year to basically GTFO, and they did not. But they, I feel as far as Warren Ellis content goes, Castlevania is one of his most even-handed takes on religion, and again, I think a large part of it is because he did his homework with regards to spiritual philosophies and intellectual movements that would have been relatively contemporary to the time in which Castlevania was set. And I think that helped him create a more three-dimensional world than some of his other works have managed to.
Only problem is that as much as I like some of the character development that happens in the later seasons, there's some things that just slow to a crawl, and the heroes are mostly inconsequential to the outcome of where the story ends for each season. It's like they
Yeah, there are pacing issues, and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and
yeah.
say that had he been able to actually do the like 10 seasons he had planned, um it would have gotten into some of the things that got glossed over.
I
But
was hoping Isaac was
the
going to
gods of
be
Me
dead.
Too did what they do, and so he got the boot. And
I was I was
all things considered, given how he was basically being booted out while he was working on season 4,
mhm.
I think that given the pressures he was working under, season 4 actually wound up being kind of pretty good for again him
I
basically
just wanted Isaac to be
working
dead because that would
with a gun to his head.
that would have been a cool idea to have Isaac become death, and then when we get to Nocturne and Dracula comes back, they come face to face with Isaac, now as death. I was that was my head canon for a while, and I was like, yeah, okay.
I really
I will
liked
accept good guy, let good guy, lesser evil, Isaac now. Damn,
I
would that be a good idea?
I liked Isaac's character arc in season 3. Not
Mhm.
since Prince Zuko from Avatar have I seen a character go from, because here's the thing, I hated Isaac in season 2 because he was so one-dimensionally nihilistic.
Mhm.
But by the end of season 3, he was my favorite character because they actually gave him something of a redemption arc. I would have
Oh
liked to
hell
have seen um, more um, more of the work between season 3 and 4 than we ended up getting. But of course, um, Warren was getting Me Too at the time and had to wrap everything up in season 4, whether he liked it or not. Um, but honestly, I even kind of like the way Isaac ends up in season 3 better than I do where he ended up in season 4, because had he had the 2 or 3 seasons necessary to go from I still don't like people, but I'm willing to give people a shot to the kind of almost humanitarian he ended up being in season 4, I think it would have worked a lot better. But honestly, I liked the kind of nuanced take on revenge that the captain kind of left him with in
Mhm.
the end of season 3, where it's like, no, vengeance has its place, bastards need punishing, but after the vengeance, um, you need something more to aspire to, which frankly is a much more adult take on vengeance or revenge than you usually get. It's either vengeance is good by definition or vengeance is bad and no one who's moral would ever take vengeance is usually the take on vengeance we get in most stories. But again, I really like the kind of middle ground that the captain winds up meeting Isaac on in season 3, where it's like, no, vengeance has its place. People who have wronged you should be wronged in turn, but after that, um, aspire to something more. That's a really 3-dimensional and nuanced way of looking at it that I wish we could see in more things.
Yeah,
Punishment is a good
you're not.
example.
Yeah. Well, I would say like to end on the Castlevania and how it handled religion and faith. I will give like Ellis credit on that. That is not only him being even-handed in spite of his record as well as the lore lore changes from game to show. It did have its good moments.
I will say also, speaking as the token occultist here, I like I liked the way there was a meaningful difference in Netflix's Castlevania between superstition and magic, because um uh as an example, in season 4, you see peasants playing with a what essentially looks like a planchet from a Ouija board. Um, and one of the vampires who knows something about how magic actually works takes it and goes, I forget the line, but it was something like, "Oh, the idiots assumed it must have been a charm against arrows or something." Instead of the means of divination that it actually is, which is really interesting because usually you either in stories you either get magic as a metaphor for something else, whether it be religion or whether it be science, or you get magic is nothing but superstition and no one reasonable should ever believe in it. And it's nice to show that just because something is magical doesn't mean it's not rational. And speaking as an occultist with more than 18 years of experience now, um, it really annoys me when people assume that just because some idiot is being unnecessarily superstitious about some aspect of magic doesn't mean that it's all bunk or that it's all stupid or that it's irrational. Especially not during the Middle Ages and early modern period, because back then, the natural sciences, otherwise known as what we would today refer to as science or the sciences, and the occult sciences, which are the rationalized subject matters of magic, astrology, and alchemy, were studied together, and frequently one would bleed into the other, to the point that even Isaac Newton, who is obviously more well known for his theories on mathematics and physics now, even Isaac Newton was an alchemist. And hell, even though it wasn't common during the historical era in which he lived, even Albert Einstein did alchemy research in his spare time.
Which is
And
something not a lot of
most
people
people
know.
completely ignore anything rational about magic or esoteric spirituality, and it annoys me when they do that. Sorry.
Yeah, you certainly see that like in works of fiction every now and again, and yet that may change like in the future because like with much like with ma magic and other facets of supernatural phenomena like religion back then they were actually handily and with tact. I mean, take for example the two-parter from Justice League where Solomon Grundy actually teams up with the Justice League to face off a Cthulhu-like god that the Thanagarians used to worship,
Yeah,
but they
Ixultu in the Justice League finale before Justice League Unlimited started.
yeah, and that was essentially a hot girl focused episode because you see her like going from being an atheist to actually see that faith and religion like has its purpose and not every every religious practice is like the one that her people like practice, but also they not everyone like went through what she and the Thanagarians went to when they rebelled against Kotultu.
More to the point. Also, uh, Hawk Girl was an atheist in the active sense of the word. Like she knows gods exist, but she refuses to interact with any of them. And I like that nuance because it shows a deference towards the in-universe logic of the story. I hate modern day writers when they have characters be atheistic in a world in which the supernatural is confirmed to verifiably exist because it doesn't make sense there. Atheism in that sense should be the I refuse to abstain or I refuse to work with any deities or worship any deities sense rather than the I simply don't believe these things exist because an example in a really bad Batman comic from I want to say about 2017 there
Yeah.
was a story where Batman was being put on trial and for some reason his atheism came up and I remember going over it with my friend Eglantine, and both of us just sat there going, how the fuck could Batman possibly be an atheist in the DC freaking universe? He knows Diana, the literal goddamn goddess of the hunt. Like he has worked with her, he knows that her and her pantheon exist. How could he possibly be an atheist in the I don't believe in the supernatural aspect? Like maybe the like generic random people in the DC universe might be able to still be atheists because they don't have direct exposure to these things. But characters who do verifiably have regular exposure to the supernatural and
Or
to
if they
various
spoke
pantheons of
Christian,
deities should not be an atheist
I mean,
in the I
before
don't
that,
believe it exists sense. I'm
before you
fine with
even
him being
mention
an
well,
that,
atheist in the I'm avoiding worshiping or
yeah.
working with any entities sense.
But if I
yeah, I mean,
recall, he's supposed to be
only
Christian. He's supposed to be Christian in nature, long
yeah.
before he
Uh,
met Superman and Diana.
not um, not to the best of my recollection. I I don't
Well,
think
okay.
for at least the last 20 or 30 years, I don't think they've ever really portrayed Batman as specifically or devoutly religious in any sense.
Mm.
Which
Well,
I'm fine with, because his whole gimmick is the self-made man. But um, that doesn't mean he should be an atheist because, again,
Mhm.
he's worked with Diana, the literal goddamn goddess of the hunt.
well, I mean, to be fair, like with Diana, like, she is named after that goddess of the hunt, but with her, she was born from the born from clay, as well as being endowed with the abilities of the other goddesses of the Greek pantheon. And with Bruce, like he may have been like raised like in a he had a religious background, but then after his parents died, and yeah, he has worked with supernatural beings, be it heroes or encounters them like as villains. It
I
actually
mean,
reminded me of an old video from Weaponized Nerd Rage where he actually debunks like the whole Bruce is an atheist by accurately say that he is an apostate, like who pretty much like abstain like from
Yeah,
religion
the
after
like
like the murder
proper
of his
the
parents.
proper philosophical term would probably be something more akin to anti-theism, i.e., in the sense of he knows the gods exist, but he refuses to interact with any of them, or at least to worship them in any sort of submissive sense.
Yeah.
That is fair, which is actually is a good thing you brought that up because that needs to be established because there is a clear distinction between that and atheism. They're not synonymous.
Let's just call it for
I
what it
mean,
is. Let's call it for
again,
what it is.
I'm fine with the idea of kind of weaponized atheism in the sense that Hot Girl means it of I know the gods exist and fuck them, so I'm actively refusing to deal with any deities. But um, in the I don't believe these things exist sense, no one who is a regular member of the Justice League could or should be in any reasonable degree an atheist in the I don't think it exists sense because like Dr. Fate, the spirit of the Helm of Fate is named Nabu, which is a Babylonian wisdom deity. Of course, there's also the Spectre, who is the spirit of the wrath of God in the Old Testament sense incarnate, and the Phantom Stranger, who, depending on his origin story, is either Judas Iscariot punished to wander the earth after betraying Christ, or an angel who chose to side with neither God nor Lucifer in the war in heaven and chose to defend humanity from the fallout of the war in heaven instead, and was condemned to wander the earth for that reason. I personally favor that option just because I think it's more interesting than him just being a human, but que sera sera, I suppose. Different strokes, etc.
Well, I will
I'm
say,
gonna call it for
I
what it
mean,
is. Just people injecting their own personal beliefs into a character that was written to not be that way at all.
Well,
which is rather became prevalent, really, especially in the late 2000s, all the way into the 2010s.
well, as usual, debunking and rebuking of the social justice mafia is warranted here because they are the ones who explicitly started the whole you should actively avoid in universe logic when you can because my themes are more important derp. And that's why there are no like or very few three-dimensionally written characters now because they don't know how to make characters written as though they are operating on information presented to them in universe.
I mean, hey, heck, I remember like for a time, so like, there was actually a a little guide from Marvel and DC respectively to showcase like where each character like is like what religion do they practice. Like somehow I'm gonna disregard that in order to like shove in your beliefs onto them, even though it's incongruent with their individual character.
And to be fair, this does occasionally happen on the anti-social justice side as well. In particular, I'm thinking of John Della Rose, who apparently thought that Comicsgate was some kind of hyper traditionalist, hyper Christian movement where they wanted characters to all be written as though they were Judeo Christians, even characters for whom that would make absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Even though various heroes and villains are not only of different religious backgrounds, but also, well, even the members like from different religious backgrounds as well as political affiliations. That was true diversity of thought and freedom of expression.
Yeah, which is why the Cadmus story arc of Justice League, for example, is written with more thought put into it than a kids cartoon from yesteryear is written with more thought put into it than apparently modern serious dramas. Like the scene that I always think of is the one where different members of the Justice League are talking about their beliefs about Cadmus, and Green Arrow comes in and goes, as an old school lefty, I think the government is there to do for people what they cannot do for themselves, and so it makes perfect sense that the government would want a contingency plan in case the Justice League ever went rogue and stuff. Meanwhile, in I'm not sure if it's referenced in that exact scene, but I know around that same time there was an episode specifically devoted to the question, who was a Randian objectivist and was very much coming at it from the opposite angle entirely, to the point that he almost assassinated Lex Luthor so that Superman wouldn't have to, because in his words, I'm a well-known crackpot, and the League can survive my disgrace. They couldn't survive the loss of the symbol of hope that Superman is.
Yeah. Although like he based that off of footage he's seen from the world of Justice Lords. But again, like you actually understand like where he was. You can tell they understood not just the Trinity, but also the other characters of the DC universe from the comics, including the Question.
And they let the characters be the characters as the characters would be, and not what the author or writer wanted them to be in the moment. Again, the dichotomy of you've got Green Arrow on the one side being the kind of old school lefty, and then you've got the Question being the poster child for Randian objectivism and so on. You could not do that in modern day writing, because modern day writers frankly get annoyed with the idea that there are philosophical or moral frameworks other than their own that are valid or even worth consideration.
I'm about to wrap it up because I'm fading fast right now.
Yes.
Well, I would say like to wrap it all up is even in spite of everything that these guys have been doing, essentially, like giving a misrepresentation like of the different religions, as well as trying to make things like completely secularized without religion. Now, it's not only coming back to bite them in the butt, but people are coming back to religion.
So
I also find it interesting that in different parts of Europe, the religion that's coming back is the old school polytheistic religion. Like Hellenism is actually on the rise in Greece, and there's a large percentage of people in the Nordic countries that are returning to the worship of the Norse gods, etc. I found that extremely interesting. That not only is religion making a comeback, but it's the old school kind sometimes.
that's quite such a good talk. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Those for you and those nonsense motherfuckers keep popping in and out. We can cover this during a chill stream or several chill streams, but I have an announcement to make, and I'm going to make this announcement. We're definitely going to be covering some more streams before this happens, though. But next month, I think it's high time we take a month-long break from streaming and pick it back up to do the reboot streams. Authenticator, are you familiar with the reboot series?
The computer animated one from a couple decades ago.
Yep, done by Mainframe.
Vaguely, I don't think I've ever sat down and watched it, but I'm
You're
familiar with it
disqualified.
kind of by osmosis.
No, I'm kidding. No, if you want to, we can have you on for that discussion.
You can find a reboot on both Amazon Prime and Tubi.
And YouTube.
Tubi has a lot of really great for being a free service. It has a lot of really great stuff on it.
When it has it, sometimes it removes things as well.
Well, yeah, but so does every
But they
other
also
streaming
bring it back.
platform, unfortunately.
But they at the same time, like Tubi does bring them back later on.
Yeah, they do. But yeah, we'll be taking a month long break to recharge the batteries. I think this year is draining. Su- Surprisingly, it's very draining as of right now. So I'm going to give everybody a break to recharge, get focused, take care of everything that they can outside in the real world. So once we're done with the streams here this May, to cover enough for you guys, so you guys can eat while we're away.
When is our last stream?
No, we're not talking about Guardian Code. Hail to the doll. I was looking at the ethereal,
I,
ethereal dragons.
I was gonna respond.
Holiday.
So I was like, heck no.
I was like, wait a minute. What crap? Oh, I'm reading that's crap sequel. Yeah. We're not talking about no damn. That is not even a sequel. That is not a sequel.
Which crab sequel is
It's
Ed
called
referring to?
The Guardian Code. It's supposed to be a sequel, but from what I've seen in the trailers and the clip spots, that is not a sequel.
It's
No.
kind of like how we don't talk about the third season of Gargoyles,
Right.
which, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't exist. The series finale was and until the original creative comes back and starts doing more episodes in line with the original format. The last episode of Gargoyles was the Gathering two-parter.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I and anyone else is concerned, I think.
The Gathering
Yep.
two-part. You didn't like the third season with the hunters?
No.
Wait a minute. The hunters they were actually featured like in season 2.
I thought you were talking about. I thought you were talking about the Glide Chronicles for a minute there.
Well, yes,
You the one that's
that
on.
too. But as far as I'm concerned, the last episode of Gargoyles is the Gathering two-parter
You know what?
because it worked so well as a series finale, and they should have stopped there.
You know what? I think you're right about season 3. Yeah, those hunters weren't really that great, to be honest.
And they never really did as much as I wish they had done with Alexander and training in his powers and stuff. I also don't like that season 3 and obviously the Goliath Chronicles in particular tried to be a lot more comedic than the previous 2 seasons had been, and I don't think it worked.
We'll talk about that one day, probably next year. We'll talk about Gargoyles. I think it's high time we do talk about some of the great Disney programs that Disney produced.
Before the fall.
And reminisce on a time when Disney was good and trying to
and actually delivered on the brand that they're supposed to be.
Shows like DuckTales, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, Goof Troop, the like.
Fillmore. Anyone remember Fillmore?
Yep.
I remember Fillmore. This didn't watch it that much.
You might have missed out then if you didn't watch. I'm pretty sure all the episodes of Fillmore are free on YouTube. Speaking of episodes, speaking of shows,
not interested that much.
Speaking of shows that didn't last very long, and I think you can get all the episodes for free on YouTube. Dave the Barbarian.
Oh yeah,
Dave the Barbarian was a short-lived masterpiece.
You probably had a Clockwork Orange me on that one.
Okay, long story short, with Dave the Barbarian, think of it as a affectionate parody of Conan the Barbarian and Sword and Sorcery.
I just look at Dave the Barbarian and I think, man, I'd rather be watching World of Quest actually.
Oh, another oldie but goodie.
And then there was the attempt that Disney XD made to do like a live action action adventure series with Aaron Stone. If anyone remembers that.
I remember Aaron Stone. It
Me
had
too.
potential.
It did. It really did.
A lot of shows almost had a lot of these live shows that they had, especially in Cartoon Network, had potential. Problem was they were on the wrong network.
Okay,
Oh,
no,
All
here
these shows should have been on Wham.
I'm gonna defend the live action era of Cartoon Network a little bit here.
I ain't say we're bad. I'm saying they were on the
I
wrong network.
I I I think it's worth noting that historically the term cartoon actually meant short film. It didn't
Hmm.
mean animation. So in theory, doing live action shows on the Cartoon Network is not a terrible idea. And in
Yeah,
particular, my favorite, if we're talking about the live action cartoon era or Cartoon Network era, was Unnatural History.
yeah,
By God, that
love that
show
one.
should have had at least 4 seasons.
Freaking Unnatural History was freaking amazing, and I want to see more of that. And
right.
to some extent, Tower Prep. I like the concept of Tower
Tower
Prep.
Prep had such an interesting premise, and I wish we had gotten to see like the actual resolution of it. And even the like attempts to do like reality TV style like competition shows like Destroy Build Destroy weren't bad. Like they were entertaining in a similar way to how Mythbusters did entertaining. Obviously not as good as Mythbusters, but I enjoyed watching Destroy Build Destroy. Um,
Couldn't get into it, but I saw its appeal though.
I gotta
That
say,
and
like,
the Incredible Crew.
oh
I only
yeah, I
like
remember
one
the
thing
Incredible
about
Crew.
Incredible Crew.
I don't remember many of the other shows on the live action block of Cartoon Network. I remember there was one where you had to answer trivia questions while riding roller coasters, which as a premise intrigued me. Um, but
Sounds
I know they
vague.
kind of had their generic ghost hunting show at one point, although I don't remember what it was called.
The
I
Outsiders.
I switched off whenever time that shit came on.
It's called the
I
Outsiders.
I kept for the longest time thinking that House of Anubis was on the live action Cartoon Network block, but no, that was Nickelodeon that did um that did House of Anubis. I
Anyways,
think what made me think it was on that block though was because it was kind of similar to
hey,
Unnatural
let me start
History
you
and
guys
Tower Prep.
out so we can go to bed now.
Yes, sorry.
One question. What is our last stream before we have a little break? Do you know?
I'll leave that as a surprise.
All right. All right.
Though next week we'll cover the Predator franchise
Mm-hmm.
on
Okay.
Tuesday.
Okay.
But there is a movie spotlight that I want to do before we go officially onto our little small vacation.
Hiatus.
I'm leaving. Thank you. Whatever you want to call it, I'm calling it a vacation. But I'm leaving that also as a surprise, and I hope that you guys have seen this movie. At least saw bits of it, or at least know the memes behind it, or even watched a few clips of it. But yeah, I'm gonna leave that a secret, and you guys will have to.
You're gonna have us watch Orgasmo, aren't you?
Oh my
No,
God. Oh my
I
God.
would love to, but no.
I would pass on that one. I'll let you guys enjoy that one.
Oh, she's seen it. She's aware of orgasmo. Oh, this will be interesting.
I'm
No, but
curious.
no, it's not orgasmo, but it's definitely a. I'll give you well, no, I'm not gonna give you a hint because y'all guess it.
Okay. You can leave it as a
Yeah,
surprise.
so yeah, one more movie spotlight. When we do come back before we do reboot, hopefully, or at least during reboot, we might do an anime spotlight, and I think it's gonna be one of the Ghibli films.
Is there gonna be another episode of Real Millennials next
It's
week,
always
or
gonna
is
be
this the
Real
last one
Millennials.
for a while?
It's gonna be the last one for a while, but there will definitely be a Real Millennials next week. It's gonna be one for next week as well, but yeah, we're stopping all operations during June just to recalibrate and pick out it. If nothing else, you just sit tight and wait for Dom's signal.
Oh, lol.
If you guys are well connected, just look for the D signal.
Lol.
But no,
Also phrasing.
the authenticator, everyone.
Hi folks. I am the authenticator. I do have a YouTube channel. I don't post on there very often. I also co-host a podcast every Saturday with the Brainstormer of Pop Culture. That's called Podcast of the Storm, if you guys are interested in that. I also do a podcast on men's rights and men's issues with Mr. E2099 called The Duality of Man. It is currently on hiatus, though, because he is in college trying to finish up his degree and doesn't have much spare time. Other than that, you guys probably will be able to find me here whenever the Real Millennials happens, and maybe I'll start showing up at other stuff. Who knows? But until then, cheers, guys. I will see you in the next one.
Still muted, Wolf.
I said, don't worry. We're just breaking you in so we can fit you into to some other good stuff. Just
I can understand if you guys have a limited tolerance for my shenanigans. I realize I am a very pedantic and sometimes very dry motherfucker.
oh, let's not go. Let's not view it that way. No, we just like I said, just trying to get used to you. We have too many strong personalities on this panel every chance we get. So
Like I said, I don't hold it against anybody. I'm aware I'm an acquired taste, to put it mildly.
so yeah, the Hound of the South, Donick Powell.
Well, thank you everyone for coming in and listening to us in this episode of Religion and Spirituality and the Real Millennials. Next week, on Thursday, we'll be doing an episode dedicated to Memorial Day. So yeah, make sure you stay tuned as we talk about the holiday as well as works of fiction that deals with soldiers and how those works handle how they honor the people that fought for their countries. Until then, this is the House of South Donald Powell signing off. And remember, cynicism and nihilism are for losers. So keep up the good fight and maintain hope, idealism, and optimism alive in the world.
Our silent protagonist, Dark Stranger.
Sorry if I'm just here tonight, but thank you for having me all the same.
The lovely Leia Leia plus size.
Good evening, everyone. This is Leia Plus Size, your lovely Lady of Valor, and thank you for those that come to join this discussion about religion. It may not be everybody's cup of tea, but we hope we gave you something to think about. Until then, in the comments below, leave any comments you have about different types of religion or how religion has been featured in media, whether it be books, novels, television, comic books, storylines that you're familiar with. Leave it in the comments below. I'm sure Wolf will appreciate them. Until then, we everybody have a safe and wonderful holiday weekend, and we'll see you next time.
So we'll come here with to remind you guys once again that you are the UN Spacey. Welcome to the Wolf Fleet.
Big smiles, everyone. You beat the bad guy.
What a lot of fun. You guys have been real swell. And there's not a one who can say this ended well. All those those secrets you've been concealing. Say you're happy now, once more with feeling. Now I gotta run. See you home.